So, are you ready to start asking questions?
I'm ready when you guys are. It's your show. I'm here.
So I guess we'll start with, what do you consider to be your biggest accomplishment or success as superintendent?
It's a very good question. Proud of a lot of things. So first and foremost, the longevity in the job. So superintendent right now in all districts, small, large, is usually less than about 2 or 3 years. In urban school districts like JCPS across the nation, it's really less than 18 months right now. So I'm one of the 3 longest tenured superintendents in the nation of what we call the Council of the Great City Schools, which is a collection, a collaborative really of the largest 80 school districts in America. And I'm one of the 3 longest. And I think a lot of that is the challenges that we have faced collectively in education and in society over the past 8 years. And so, I know from the very beginning of my tenure, and I look back and laugh, 2 weeks into my tenure, we had the solar eclipse. You guys were probably fifth grade?
Fifth grade.
Probably about 5th grade when we had that solar eclipse. And, I thought in the second week of my superintendency, I was going to make 97,000 kids go blind because they were going to be looking up at the sun. And when that was over, I thought, boy, that's probably going to be the hardest thing I have to deal with during my time as superintendent. Good thing that's over. But over the course of time, we dealt with a former governor who was clearly attacking JCPS and attacking teachers, and then having subsequent teacher sick-outs and having to cancel school, to a state takeover of JCPS, obviously going into dealing with COVID. And COVID was hard. I mean, it was really hard because I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't have any, science background, medical background. And I was making decisions where I'm in the middle of, if we go to school, people could die from COVID. If we don't go to school, we're ruining children's lives because they're not learning. And that's not a good position to be in. And so you're just trying to follow the medical guidelines, but it was very political. And then coming post-pandemic and the staffing shortages that we've had, all of these challenges that have taken place with staffing shortages, and then really the attacks from Frankfurt and the federal government when it comes to social issues in schools and attacking public education. I mean, it has been a really, really long journey. So I think the thing I'm most proud of is the absolute, resiliency in what I'm doing. I do it because I love JCPS. I've been here for 30 years. So many people in this district I've known for such a long time. I mean, my dad was the basketball coach here at DuPont Manual from 1968 to 1971. When I was born, he was the basketball coach at Manual High School and a teacher here. So, I mean, that's how far it goes back for me in this district. So the resiliency, but at the same time, making changes that I think were important for JCPS and making tough decisions during that time to improve the district. Because when I got in the district in 1997, and when I took over as superintendent, not much had changed in the district. It had been essentially the same. So having, during all of these crises, to still make change is something I'm proud of.
Okay, superintendents from Bullitt, Carroll, Henry, and Trumbull counties have voiced their concern over Amendment 2, with many rural counties relying solely on public schools. What are your thoughts surrounding Amendment 2 and how it could affect JCPS differently than other school districts?
Well, I will say this. I think Amendment 2, if passed or if it's voted yes on, and let's be clear, this is not a school choice amendment. This is a voucher bill is what this is. I think would be the most damaging thing to public education in the Commonwealth of Kentucky in decades. I think it would be extremely damaging to JCPS and probably even more damaging to rural districts across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This roadmap is very clear. This has happened in multitude of other states. And what has happened is, first and foremost, the money, the vouchers, which just to understand vouchers, it's a coupon for a family to take to a private school, and that coupon reduces their tuition by X of whatever the General Assembly. So if they decide the voucher's worth $5,000, it's a $5,000 coupon. 80% of the kids in other states and families that use that coupon are already in private schools. So this thought process that needy students in our community, underserved students in our community are going to go to private schools is not the case. And so I have real concerns about that. I have real concerns about what it's going to do to the state budget. And there is no question it will eventually cut into education funding. And so no matter what, we'll still have the neediest children in our community in JCPS with less funding to support those students. So that's a big thing, the budget. It's clear that kids who leave public school and go to private schools with a voucher do not do better. And most research recently from Indiana universities show they do much worse when they leave a public school and go to a private school. And then finally, one of my biggest concerns is it's not school choice, it's the school's choice. So the private schools get to pick and choose. JCPS and other public schools, we take all students. If they're special ed, if they're multilingual learners, if they're advanced students, if they're immigrant students, if they're, LGBTQ, all of these things are things that public school we open our arms to. Private schools don't do that. So we have to question who is going to be served and who is not going to be served. And are they going to be able to kick students out or not accept students? So all of those are concerns I have, and I just think it is imperative that we vote no on Amendment 2.
In your annual evaluation from the 2023-2024 school year, you received feedback in needing improvement under human resource leadership. In response to that feedback, you said, "We need to improve not necessarily in the human resources department, but in human resources." And I think that's a lot about shortage of bus drivers and what happened on the first day of the 2023-2024 school year. What do you plan to accomplish to counter this feedback received from the district before July 1st?
Well, first and foremost, the staffing shortage is one of the two biggest crises in public education that is nationwide that I think is going to have to be addressed, or 10 years from now. It's a crisis now. What it will be in 10 years, if the trend continues, will be absolutely devastating to public education. So right now, just to be clear, there are about half of the amount of teachers coming out of certification programs in post-secondary institutions in Kentucky than there was a decade ago. And so that is just not a sustainable model. And so, there are some things that I think are just nationwide problems that we're going to have to address as a local district, a commonwealth, and as a nation, because this is happening in districts across the nation. The two biggest shortages are teachers and bus drivers in every district that you can find across America right now. And that includes urban, suburban, and rural districts. However, there were clearly major errors on the first day of school. A lot of that had to do with bus driver shortage. We had half of the amount of bus drivers we had just 10 years ago, half, and providing the same services for students and families that we did 10 years ago. It's just not a sustainable model. However, there were things clearly that self-admittedly I did wrong and we did wrong as a district preparing for that first day. So I had to take ownership of that and clearly understood that, as the leader of an organization, when something doesn't go right, and the first day of school in 2023 did not go well at all, I have to take responsibility for that. And so that's definitely a part of my evaluation. I don't hide from that. I think we've fixed, or at least attempted to correct, all of those things, and I'm proud of where we are right now. But, once again, that's what I came to earlier, is the resiliency. I could have easily walked away at that time from the job, but I said, no, I want to make sure I make the tough decisions that are needed to be made so that, we get kids to school on time, we get kids home in an efficient manner. But in the long term, there's going to have to be some real tough decisions to be made. I'll My goal between now and July 1st is to make every difficult decision I possibly can and really make sure all of the changes that we are making have established roots so that the next superintendent can come in and not have to make really, really difficult decisions in their first year. I mean, being a superintendent, whoever gets this job, they're going to have to make really tough decisions. It's a hard job. But I don't want them to have to come right in and make really tough systemic issues. So my goal is to try to do as much as that as I can so that whoever comes into this job walks in on firm footing, so to speak.
And so you were talking about the first day of the 2023-2024 school year with the school cancellations the following days. From the first draft of the Start Smart plan to the initial impact to cutting buses from magnet and traditional schools, what was the process like behind the scenes?
On which specific?
I guess starting with the Start Smart plan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are things that we had to make. I mean, people are not, so many people wanted to go back and still want to go back to the 2 start times with just the 7:40 and the 9 o'clock start time for I mean, that's what everybody wants to go back to. But we just don't have the capacity to do that anymore. And so, we have 550 bus drivers right now. Unfortunately, we're right at the amount of bus drivers that we have for routes. If we go to start times, we would need 750 bus drivers. So there's just no way that, you can do both, which is get kids to school on time where they're not missing millions of minutes and only have 2 start times. We're one of the few large districts in America who only had 2 start times. And so we had to make a change. And it was a tough change. I mean, it really is and was tough change. But, it was important for me to make the difficult decisions. Now, there are things that did not, I think systemically we did not do right in the change process that I look back and say, when you're making major change, we should have done X, Y, and Z as opposed to the way we did it. But hindsight is 20/20. And so, I think, looking back on it, first of all, change had to be made. And in a large district, change is difficult. Anytime you're making major change is difficult because so many people are impacted. And usually, what I've found is most people want change until it impacts them. And then it's like, okay, I don't necessarily want that change. So, that was a really, really difficult process, but something we had to do. So I look back and I think, I would have done a lot of things differently. I would have still made the same decisions because we had to. We had no choice. But I think through the change process, I would have done things differently.
Do you predict that busing will return to magnet and traditional schools in the near future?
It's going to be a really, really difficult call on that because, and I will say this, we are one of the few large urban districts in the nation who transported every child to wherever they wanted to go.
Yeah, and to bring up a story that has been celebrated a little bit recently, with the implementation of new cell phone policies at Fern Creek High School and its success, do you see other schools in the district trying to implement the same policy going forward?
I do. I think it will be a district-wide policy. I don't know if it'll be this spring or not, that we do it for next year. But I think it's inevitable that it's going to happen, that will become most likely a district policy. That's a tough one. It's hard. I mean, but I think it's the trend nationally that will happen. Now, I will say this is my belief. It is a short-term solution to a much larger problem. Because I'll be honest, you all are way ahead of the curve when it comes to technology than the adults are. And the technology companies right now continue to work on ways to get around that. So there is no doubt that in 10 years from now, I don't believe any of us will be necessarily using just a cell phone. There will be ways around and students having access to text messages, social media, all those things where teachers, we won't even, administrators won't even know you're using it. That's just my personal belief that the technology companies want you to continue using it. The last thing they want is to lose access to young people using social media all the time. So I think changes will be made on their end to do that. And we're always behind the curve a little bit as adults. The other thing, though, we really have to, though, figure out a way where we teach young people to use it properly and appropriately. And so we're just finding that balance is so hard right now. And, you know, when I first became being a principal, being a teacher right now is so much harder because of technology. In 2007, when I became principal at J-Town High School, yeah, we had kids with flip phones and stuff, but I mean, there was no social media on phones, there was no cameras, there was no videotaping everything. You know, it just makes the job much more difficult and challenging. So I do believe that's going to happen. We will have discussions at our board, with our board in a public board meeting when the new board comes on, probably in January or February, about where the board wants to go with this. But I am anticipating that it will be something that becomes district-wide in the next 24 months.
Applications and enrollment at Manual have decreased since the last school year, most likely due to the scenario of Manual no longer having JCPS busing. What are your thoughts regarding the future of magnets, often smaller ones, that will struggle with application numbers going forward?
Yeah. Now, I don't know where Manual's enrollment is. From my data, we sure didn't lose a whole lot of kids because of transportation to DuPont Manual. I think it was less than a dozen that now I don't have that factual, so don't quote me on that. But when we took a survey, very few families said we won't be returning to Manual because of this. I do think there are magnets that will be more impacted than Manual. I do not believe, with the lack of busing to Manual, that in 10 years Manual would not be what it is today. I do have concerns, though, about providing access to DuPont Manual and other schools like it for our underserved population. I really do have concerns about that. But Brown School, for instance, has never had transportation, and they're turning away kids every single year. So, I think there's a lot more to it than just transportation, but I do believe some of the smaller elementary magnets, some of the less popular established magnets will suffer from that, but I think we're just going to have to make adjustments to that. I think a big part of this is infrastructure of public transportation in our city right now. I'll give an example. Chicago and New York City have very little transportation for their students, but when you have public transportation infrastructure that they do, still makes it challenging. I follow the news, and there's still a lot of angst with that about lack of transportation in those major cities. But, we need better public transportation infrastructure. We really do. My hope, once again, is that we are able to continue or bring back all of transportation. I don't see that happening in my time as superintendent. It's my hope that it happens. But once again, we have to set ourselves up for what we can do effectively and efficiently for getting kids to school on time.
What would you say is the biggest misconception about your job as superintendent?
The biggest misconception. Well, I've got a couple. I think number one is that I have a political agenda in what I'm doing, which I don't. I try my best to do what's right for kids when it comes to, making decisions. And in my time, when it talks politics, I've always had the right side of the political, the right be upset with me many times, but I've had the left be upset with me many times too. So, I think the fact that there is some political agenda in my job, which is just not the case at all, trying to do what's best for kids. I get really upset when people, and I tell you, I don't read social media anymore. I get really upset when people seem to think that I make decisions based on money, like somehow I'm making money off of something, or, for instance, we cancel school because of snow or go to school because of snow, that that it's a money issue, like I'm trying to make money, or enough money for like that funding has nothing to do with any of those decisions whatsoever. That is just this perception out there that, for instance, like if I don't cancel school, they say, well, he wanted, it's all about the money for the state formula is you drop the lowest 5 days from when they do your average daily attendance. They take the lowest 5 days of attendance and just wipe those away anyway. That doesn't even go into the fact, so, just misconceptions like that publicly, I think, are the things that bother me the most, or that I'm not trying to do what's best for kids. I think that's the biggest misconception that bothers me the most. But, I've just come to learn that so much of it is political. People are set in their beliefs about something and there's no change in their minds. I'm proud that every decision I've made has been trying to do what's best for the students of JCPS, and that's it. So I think, that's the biggest misconception. It's a good question, though.
Why did you decide to step down this July?
I had really, my first 4 years, although I've gone through some difficult times, obviously, in the past 2 years, first 4 years were the most difficult for me. I was just not used to the public scrutiny that you get when, and so you have this honeymoon when you come onto the job where everybody kind of celebrates the new hire. And then when the honeymoon's over and difficult decisions have to be made, I just wasn't used to the public scrutiny, the negative comments, the things like that, I say all the time that, public figures, we're just people too. And so when you get attacked, it's almost impossible not to take that internally and personally. And I think in our society right now, we tend to think of public figures as just these non-people that don't have families who are looking at that stuff too. My daughter was here at this school and she got when it would be a snow day, she would get hundreds of texts and calls, is your dad going to cancel school or not? And she would be like, and she would come out, Dad, are you going to? I said, I don't know, Jen, I'll find out 5 a.m. It's just hard on a family. But as I got more thick-skinned and confident in what I'm doing and the decisions I'm making, I decided to stay longer. Back in 2022, when my first contract was up, I had a long discussion with the board about extending the contract and how long I would go. I originally thought at that time I would go 2 more years, but I promised, they asked for 3 more years and I gave them a 3-year commitment, which this is the last of 3 years. So this was really my plan all along. It wasn't anything that happened. Plus in teacher retirement, which I'm a part of, this is my 30th year. So it is kind of the year that is the top of the scale when it comes to teacher retirement. So all of those factors came into play. And then plus, I think 8 years in this job is a lot. And I always believe as leadership in any job, everybody's replaceable. And when the new person comes in, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good, but somebody can come in with new ideas and new thoughts and new ways to address things, and that can be good too. So I think overall, it was the plan all along. For the past 3 years, this is what I had planned. It was just a matter of when I was going to announce it. And so 8 years is enough.
Do you have any regrets from your time as superintendent?
I don't know if regrets is the right word. Would I do things differently? Oh yeah, no question about it. Once again, hindsight's 20/20. My biggest regret is how the first days of school went in August of 23. I will say I'm proud of how I handled it. When we had to cancel school and the next day we came in as a team, it was really, the team was in disarray. And there was no real plan of how we are going to get back to school in a week. And I'm proud of the leadership I provided our team to say, all right, I can yell and scream, and there's going to be a time for all of that stuff where I need to hold people accountable for the mistakes that were made. But in the end, we got to get back to school here. So let's get to the whiteboard. Let's start drawing up how we're going to do this. And we got back to school. It wasn't perfect, but we got back to school and fixed a whole lot of things. So I'm proud of how I handled that, but I do regret the way that all happened, and we could have done that much better. The problem was coming no matter what. It was a tidal wave with half of the bus drivers. But I think if I could look back and say what I would change the most is I told the community that spring before that this will change, this will fix our transportation and bus driver issues. If I could go back, I would say this is a step in the right direction, but it's not going to fix we're still going to have issues. So I think that's the biggest regret that I have. I hated to have to make the decision on magnet transportation. That was a miserable decision that kept me up many, many nights. And I just, there were no good options. I think the toughest decisions for me are anytime you have to make a decision where there's no really good answer to it. So that was that. I always regret anytime a student passes away for whatever that would mean. I mean, that's under your watch when a student passes away. It's really challenging. So, I mean, I've had some difficult suicide situations. We had a young man shot at a bus stop. I don't know, I say regret. You think back, is there anything I could have done to change that? I don't know when you're talking about superintendent, and I didn't know the situations that were happening in any way. But I mean, those are always things you regret. And then, there were a couple of decisions around canceling school or not canceling school that I really regretted. Those seem small now, but during those days, there were two that stick out the most to me. One was we had an ice storm that the roads weren't bad because the roads weren't cold enough to stick the ice, but we had about 7 schools without power, Atherton being one of them. And so, I was told at that time that the power would be back on within the hour. This was about 5:30. Well, the power didn't come back on at all. And so we had kids in school. I mean, it was a miserable day for me, getting through that. And then a couple of years ago, we did an early dismissal, and the roads were just absolutely atrocious getting home. If I could go back and do that again, I would have canceled school instead of having an early dismissal. But, those are just things that you try to make the best decision with the information you have at the right time. And sometimes it backfired, and those did. Fortunately, in both of those situations, there were no, significant injuries or things like that. But those two could have been really bad. Especially the last one where the snow, and it was really bad getting home. So I've come to learn, if when in doubt, cancel school. It's just not worth it. So, I mean, I think those are the things that stick out in my mind the most of if I could go back and change, I would.
Do you plan on making any policy changes before you retire?
I don't think... most of what I'm going to do is to solidify the things that we have. So, we have some, so whether it's the student assignment plan, whether it's transportation, choice zone support, things like that. Anytime you make major change, you're going to have to adjust along the way. I want to make those adjustments as much as I possibly can. As far as policy, not necessarily. There are some real difficult facility decisions that have to be made. So things like a couple schools need to be built. Things like that are really important. We need to find a home for a couple of schools. I need to make a couple of decisions about magnets. So I want to make as many of those difficult decisions as I can before we finish up.
The board will begin their search for a new superintendent later this month. Will you be involved in this process?
Technically, no. I will guide them in any questions they have about the process. I will not be involved in any way about who they select. That is an inappropriate role for someone who is leaving the job. I've always felt that way, whether it's principal, whether it's superintendent. The person that is leaving should not have a role in who the board selects. Actually, the community should be more involved than the leaving superintendent. Because you can get into things that are personal, like, I changed this. I want someone who does what I'm asking or what I did. And that shouldn't be the case at all. I will be there when they need it to guide them through process if they have questions around things like community forums and how to organize those things and how I can assist in making sure those are effectively and efficiently run, how my staff can be available for those type of things, how communication can help get the word out about things. So I'll assist in that, but in no way will I have any part of who is the next person to be the superintendent. And I think it's really important when you leave that you leave. I'll always be a supporter of Jefferson County Public Schools, but I'm not going to be one who's going to be making comments in the media publicly or anything like that about what I agree or disagree with that's happening in the district. I just want to be a champion for the district. And it does bother me when people leave and then they want to, from the cheap seats, make comments about what's happening now. I think that's inappropriate. And I just won't do that. So, those are some of those things around that.
Now, our final questions are, what advice would you give to the new superintendent, and what are your plans after retiring?
Yeah, so, advice I would give is, first of all, I say this, whoever takes this job is going to have to be very, very thick-skinned. And I was good at it at times, and I was not good at it at other times. I mean, stay off of social media. Because when things are good and you look on social media and it's a good story, okay, yeah, but at the same time, if you start looking too much, you're going to see things about you. And I'm not saying that it's not important to know what public perception and things like it, but I have a communications team and that's what they're for. But what it does is it will cloud your decision making. If you start looking at 10 people who don't even put their name on a social media account are saying you should do this, 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 and this. Okay, that's 10 people. But maybe there's 10,000 who aren't commenting that feel a different way about it. And so I just think it's important to do that. I think without a doubt, the most important thing, you have to have passion for this school district. I honestly can't see going to another large school district and being superintendent. The job's too tough to just move to a city that you really don't have roots in. I mean, I worked at Shawnee, I worked at Wagner, I worked at J-Town, I worked at Doss High School. My daughter went here. I told you my dad was a coach and teacher here. My mom was a teacher at Ballard for 20 years. So, I mean, all of these things give you ties to the community and make you care about it. So no matter who gets it, I think there's really going to have to be someone who has, whether it's internal or external, who proves their passion for doing this work and being here. And I think the most important thing, if I would say what needs to happen, is the biggest threat to large school districts is consistent turnover of leadership. So turnover can be good in ways, but it can also be threat to the district. And when it really becomes a threat, like many large cities right now, is when you have 3 or 4 superintendents in 5 years. Because it's a tough job to learn. It takes 18 to 24 months to really learn the job before you get your feet under you. And so consistent turnover is not good. So I think whoever they choose is going to have to, number one, show they have a lot of passion for this job. Number 2 is to make sure that they're going to be here, not for a decade or 8 years, but are going to be committed to this place. The other thing I would really recommend is to get into schools as much as possible. Talk to students, talk to teachers as much as you possibly can. And then the final question, what am I going to do next? So I still have a real passion for education. So I'm going to stay in the education field. I will not be I'm not saying never would I go back to being a superintendent. Maybe if I really miss it in 3 years and the job comes open that I'm looking for or would want, maybe I'll do that. But I really believe that I'm concerned about public education. I have a passion for public education. I have a passion for taking all kids into our public schools, not kicking them out if they don't score high enough on a test, not kicking them out if they misbehave, finding options for kids. And that's what public school does. And from a patriotic standpoint, everyone has I believe the future of our nation is dependent upon public schools, a future of our city. everything I say that we have issues with in our community and nationally, I believe the answer is public education. So poverty, the answer is public education. Safety and crime, public education. Homelessness, I could go on and on as public education. So I have a real passion for that, and I want to continue to do that. But at the same sense, I think public education is under attack in our nation right now, and we need advocates for that. So we need to turn away from good school, bad school narrative. I am so tired of hearing that's a good school, that's a bad school. And I believe this. I believe high achieving schools can be a good school and can be a bad school. I believe low achieving schools on standardized test scores can be a good school. I should say good or bad, effective or ineffective. I've always said effective schools should be about what the adults do and the attitudes and beliefs that the adults come to the school with, and how they support kids as a result of that. We don't do this in medicine. We wouldn't say a hospital is ineffective because they have more deaths in their hospital than a hospital in a wealthy area. If a hospital is dealing with gunshot wounds, cancer patients, things, they're probably going to have more challenges. We don't do that, but we do that in education, where we say that's an effective school or a good or a bad school. And the intense focus on standardized testing, where, and you all know this, kids aren't really trying their best on standardized tests right now. I mean, you all, my guess is you all try a lot harder, and maybe you do, but I know my daughter tried a lot harder on the AP test than she did on the KSA test, when there's very little skin in the game for students when it comes to being proficient on KSA as opposed to ACT or my AP test. And so what we're doing here is judging schools and making decisions on schools and districts based upon standardized tests, where honestly, we're begging kids to do their best on this test. And it's just not an effective way to hold schools and districts accountable. So I believe in accountability, but I also believe that we should be monitoring and holding schools accountable in a different way. And so I can't say exactly what that is, but for the rest of my career, I want to advocate for those changes in public education and really defend public education. So I don't know what that'll be yet. I'll be trying to work in policy and things like that, but my plan for the rest of my career is to be a champion for public education.
Well, thank you. I don't think we have any
Thank
more
you.
questions, but we really
Great.
appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. Really good job. Excellent job.